Hi, friends. Welcome to Raising Lifelong Learners. I'm your host, Colleen Kessler, and this is the podcast where I encourage you to trust yourself and your differently wired kiddos as you help cultivate their curiosity, encourage them to discover the world around them, embrace who they are wired to be, all while helping them discover their passions, interests, and raise them to become the amazing adults they're meant to be. Hey, welcome back. This is episode 195. I'm so glad you're here. Today we're talking all about testing. I have been to a couple different conventions so far this season, and I have been talking to members in my membership community, the Learners Lab, and this question keeps coming up again and again. It must be the end of the year when families are thinking about how to measure what their kids are doing and what they've accomplished and if they're meeting their needs. And so the question keeps coming up again and again and again. And so I figured I would tackle it so that you can tell my perspective of assessing your kids for various things when you are homeschooling them. So I just want to make sure that you know that that is the lens through which I'm discussing this topic. So if you are a family who doesn't homeschool their kid or after schools them or enriches them through a homeschooling kind of approach, but they go to a traditional school, I do have a different answer for you, and I am happy to chat with you. You can reach out through the show notes for this episode with the contact form or the voicemail widget, or if you're a member of the Learners Lab community, you can ask me in the DMs. Otherwise, I think that we tackle the question pretty well. So, without further ado, I want to thank CTC Math for their continued support this season. Check them out at ctcmath.com if you haven't had a chance yet. It is a math program we use and love. And pop those earbuds in, settle in for a great conversation about testing your kiddos when and why you should or shouldn't. All right, let's get on with today's episode. Hey there. Okay, so this question has come up a lot between the online community I run, the Learners Lab, and conversations that I've had at convention this season. So I thought it would be good to just record an answer to it and be able to share that with you in multiple different ways. So here we go. Are you ready for this? So the question that comes up, and it comes up a lot, I've mentioned it on the podcast before, I've talked about it in person. I've also talked about it online in the membership community and in emails back and forth before. This is kind of just a global recording of the answer that I have to that question so that you can inform your own thoughts and visions as you approach it. So the question is, should I test my kid? And it feels like that shouldn't be a big deal, a yes or no answer, but really there's a lot of nuance to it. And so I want to approach it from the perspective of, first, what kind of testing are we talking about? Second, what is the motivation for testing? And then third, should I or shouldn't I? And where do I go from here when it comes to testing? So let's start with that first question. What kind of testing am I looking for? So this season at the Great Homeschool Convention, I am doing a talk with my good friend, Sarah McKenzie, all about differently wired readers. And it's a great talk. In fact, it's turned out to be such a good talk that at the end of the season, both Sarah and I plan to take one of the recordings from one of the events and put it out on the podcast. So those of you who weren't able to come this season are able to listen to it and enjoy and glean from it, so to speak, because it's just been such a rich discussion. Stay tuned for that. That'll be coming like in July or August once the season is over. But the question comes up a lot in there, should I get my kid tested for dyslexia or for a specific learning disability? And then I get the question a lot, should I get my kid tested for giftedness? And so first kind of think about what it is you're looking to have tested and why. So there are lots of things that we can be testing our kids for, right? We could be testing them for specific learning disabilities. We could be testing them for autism spectrum. We can be testing them for sensory processing disorder. We could be testing them for anxiety, specific anxiety disorders or challenges. We could be testing them for giftedness and ADHD, all sorts of different things. And I'm missing a ton because there are so many different things neurologically that go on with our kids, particularly our differently wired and neurodiverse kids, right? No matter what you call them, neurodiverse, neurodivergent, differently wired, quirky, outside the box, whatever it is, there's a lot going on. And teasing out what exactly is going on can be quite the challenge. So the natural question is, should I go pay a professional to get this figured out and help me out? Okay, so first, think about what it is you're testing so you know kind of where to go. The second thing is, and we're going to go a little more in depth into these different things in just a second, but the second thing is, why do you want to test? So a lot of people who come to me specifically about testing for giftedness give me the answer that they just want to know. They want to make sure that their gut telling them that their kiddo is gifted is right and true and accurate. And they want to make sure that they're helping their kids meet their potential. If that's the reason you're looking to have your kiddo tested, I would say save the money. So gifted testing, when we're talking about IQs, we're talking about cognition, cognitive scores, we're talking about a full-scale intelligence test with a neuropsychologist, a neuropsych exam, which gives you all sorts of different subtests and compares the different reasoning skills and types of cognitive skills that there are. This is great information, but it's really, truly great information when your kids are in a school system and you need hard facts and data to advocate for their accommodations. When you're homeschooling, if you are a homeschooling parent and are meeting your kids' needs where they are and moving them forward every step of the way, every day, and you know in your gut that your kids are really good in this area and that area and the other area, but they might struggle in this one or that one, and you're meeting them where they are and shoring up their weaknesses through celebrating and encouraging their strengths, you're already doing everything that you're going to do, even with the piece of paper. And here's the thing. A full-scale neuropsych exam is going to cost you a lot of money. It's going to cost you thousands of dollars if you're going to the right person. I've had others ask me about online IQ tests, and there are so many of those kinds of things out there, just like there are so many personality tests online. There's even an assessment on my site, finding out your kid's learning style. All of those tests have limitations. None of them give you a truly perfectly accurate opinion or assessment of your kid's IQ, your kid's learning styles, your kid's preferences, all of those different things, because they're so subjective. And there's no control. There's no way to standardize it and make sure that you're actually doing it exactly how it needs to be done in order to be truly measured and scored against anybody else who's taking it. So you can get a ballpark perhaps, but you're not going to get an accurate true scale IQ score that's going to give you anything other than an idea of where your kid falls. There are also a lot of great books and resources on my site too on characteristics of gifted kids. And so if that's what you're looking for and your kids check the majority of the boxes of those characteristics, I say call a spade a spade, call them gifted. If they also struggle with anxiety or sensory processing challenges or impulsivity in whatever way, shape, or form they struggle, call them twice exceptional. You can assess your kid with a pretty solid accuracy rate. Instead of spending several $1,000s on a test that is not going to do you much more than give you a piece of paper that says what their IQ is and in which areas cognitively they excel and which areas are a little bit more of a struggle, but don't actually give them more accommodations because your homeschool co-op's not going to care about that piece of paper. They're going to care about what your kid is doing in the co-op class. A college application is not going to ask for your kid's IQ score. They're going to go based on the transcript, the extracurriculars, the essays, the interviews, the auditions, if they're going into a fine arts program, whatever. And so you could use that money to apply it towards other enrichment activities, things that your kids love, coaching in areas of their passions or their interests. And it's a better use of your time and money than an IQ score. Now, the only caveat I would put on that is if there is a program that your kiddo really wants to participate in, or you think would benefit your kid and relies on test scores to be a part of it, then it might be worth looking at what tests they accept in order for them to be accepted into the program, and then find an assessor who can administer that test. So, for example, let's say You don't have a lot of opportunities in your area for your kids to get their needs met or be challenged in areas that they're interested in. Maybe that's academics. Maybe they need some more social and emotional skill work, but they need it with kids who are like them and think in a quirky way. So there are programs like the Davidson Young Scholars Program that they do meetups throughout the summer and the year. UNASA, I forget what the acronym stands for, but we'll make sure that I link it, or other resources like that that require test scores. If that's the case, then it's worth testing so your kids can go to those programs. Now, people have asked me again and again and again. I will tell you without a shadow of a doubt, all 4 of my kids are gifted. I only have an IQ score on 1 of them, but I will look you in the eye and I will look any educator in the eye and I will tell them my kids are gifted beyond a shadow of a doubt. And if they ever went into a program or a school, I would fight for them to be accommodated within the gifted programs. And if I needed to get an assessment at that time, I would. The only reason one of them is assessed and identified as gifted is because at the time of assessment, we were trying to keep him in the school system. We were trying to make sure his needs were being met. We met with psychologists, we met with the school psychiatrist. We had all sorts of assessments done because we wanted to know what was going wrong. In truth, that was way back 20 years ago, 15 years ago in my parenting, and I've grown a lot since then. That was when we were trying to fix problems instead of build up strengths. And so we were working from the deficit-based approach of what is wrong with my kid and how can I fix him? So we did all sorts of assessments. And I don't highly recommend that approach to education and parenting now. I've learned a lot, but that was where we were then. So he has an identification of profound giftedness, actually, anxiety. We suspect sensory processing disorder, but we never went further with that assessment. But he also has an identification of ADHD. All of those things he is assessed with and identified as. My next one has no identifications, but I will tell you she's gifted. I can even ballpark about where I think her IQ falls based on my own knowledge and my own research. My third one is identified in some areas because, and I'll go to this in the next section, because we were trying to help her be successful in different areas of her life. We did not pursue gifted identification, but I will tell you she is twice exceptional. She is identified with sensory processing disorder, auditory processing disorder, dyslexia, anxiety, and probably like suspicion of ADHD, but we don't have that identification. And then the last one isn't identified in anything because we haven't reached a point at this point where we need further identification. So I'm saying that it's very dependent on what your needs are at a given time when it comes to identification. So as far as giftedness goes, I would say that if you are planning to continue homeschooling and you feel that you have enough resources at your fingertips and you're able to meet your kids where they are and move them forward, a gifted assessment is not a smart use of your finances or your time or the stress involved in it, because it's not going to give you any more information than you have right in front of you by observing your kid and becoming a student of your child, or reading a couple books on giftedness. And I will link to some good books that relate to this topic and can help you kind of tease out a potential identification that you would feel comfortable with.
Hey there. Okay, I want to take a quick minute and talk to you about CTC Math. So CTC Math, our sponsor for this season, is the math program that we have chosen to use for our own kids this year. And actually, we've been using it for the last couple years. And one of the reasons we switched math programs over to CTC Math exclusively is because it allows extreme flexibility. I love, love, love all of the openness that it offers to us as a family of differently wired kids. We've got kids in our family who have just taken off in math super quickly and have always had an aptitude for it. And we've had kids in our family who have not been really strong math kids. And the CTC Math program is set up in a way that allows for us to meet the needs of each of those individual kids without buying a bunch of different programs or levels. I love that when you subscribe to CTC Math, you get access to K-12 math levels. You have the ability to skip around. You can move forward or move back as often as you want. And parents have really great controls and get good reports. So I love that I can go in and I can set my expectations for my kids. So my kiddo who's super strong in math right now, I can set it so that in order for him to move on to the next lesson, he needs to get a 90% or higher, because his biggest failing in math is speeding through it and making careless mistakes. So I want to make sure he slows down and he takes his time, because when he does slow down and take his time, he gets the answers correct, usually on his first time through. But for my kiddos who struggle a little bit with math, I want to make sure that they're feeling empowered and they're feeling successful. So I'm able to set their expectation closer to 80 or 85%. That way they're more able to be successful the first time through a new math concept than they would if I set it to 90 or 95%. It gives you the opportunity to customize it for your kids in the way that works best for them individually and not just as a whole. The other thing I like is the weekly reports that I get an email every single week that lets me know how many times my kids logged on, how many lessons they completed, what their percentage was overall, and a general idea of how they're doing. And then I can click through if I want, and I can get a better breakdown of the exact areas in which they had issues or the areas in which they were super successful, so I can adjust if I need to, or I can meet with them to make sure that they're understanding concepts. Such a flexible program with so many great little pieces to it that I just love recommending it to anybody who's looking for a math program that's flexible enough to work with all different types of kids and is affordable and user-friendly. So check them out at ctcmath.com. Let them know that we sent you from the Raising Lifelong Learners podcast, and let's get back to the episode.
Now, the next part of that answer comes in when we start talking about other challenges. Now, when we talk about anxiety, when we talk about sensory processing disorder, when we talk about specific learning disabilities like dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and any number of them that go along with that, the question becomes a little bit different when we start to talk about specific learning disabilities or challenges. So when we're talking about things like dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, processing issues like auditory processing or visual processing challenges, sensory processing disorder, autism, ADHD, ADD, generalized anxiety disorder, or things like that, my answer becomes a little bit different. My answer stems from what are the things you're observing at home and how is it affecting your child in a global way? Meaning, is it just affecting your child when they are faced with something they don't really want to do, or in certain circumstances and situations that you might be able to adjust or do differently? Or is it affecting them globally? Meaning, is it affecting every aspect of their life? Social, educational, emotional, and anything that they want to do, even when it comes to the things that they're good at or their strengths, then you want to take a closer look. So this is what prompted us to get the identification in our third child. The anxiety and the overall sense of doom and worry was affecting her globally. It was making it difficult for her to get to sleep, get out of bed in the morning, try new things, take risks, follow through on any assignment or activity we were doing. It was affecting her in all areas. So was her ability to deal with outside sensations. She was getting overwhelmed easily. She was constantly needing physical touch and input, but then often push others away because sometimes it was just too much. And we didn't know how to meet her needs so that she could get the input she needed in the way that she needed it, while also meeting her anxiety needs in a way that would be successful for her. I learned so much about my own anxiety with my other kids, and things like that through going to therapy with her and talking things out with a psychologist. So in that case, I would say, if whatever the challenge is affecting your child and the greater family in a global and pervasive way, and you've tried a bunch of different things. You've gone to, say your suspicion is related to like a learning disability, and you've gone to Marianne Sunderland's site, Homeschooling with Dyslexia, and you've read things and you've tried strategies. Say it's with impulsivity and ADHD, and you've read things on my site about working with a kiddo who's impulsive and hyperactive. You've read about overexcitabilities, and it's still more than you can give. And it is affecting their self-esteem. It's affecting how they interact with others, both personally and in larger social situations. It's affecting their relationships with their family and their friends and the extended family, neighbors. then you want to pursue support. And so how do you go about that? Which is the last part of that question. Where do you even begin? You've decided that this is affecting your child in a way that is detrimental to their social and emotional needs and their education. So where do you go? Well, I always want to point you to the medical field for a couple reasons. One, they have gone through extensive training in these different areas in their specialty. So they can pinpoint some things that you may not notice and point you to the right professionals. They are also not trying to sell you something. I think it's a really important distinction to make between groups and organizations within like hospital and doctor systems and independent learning centers. I don't think there's anything wrong with freestanding and independent learning centers. I think there are some incredible professionals and educational entrepreneurs that have started programs that can really do amazing things with and for children. However, there are some who are notorious for finding something wrong with your child and, having exactly the right therapy with a high price tag that can help your child be successful in life. And I have a healthy dose of skepticism for that because I don't think there is any silver bullet or magical pill or perfect program that will work for every single child with a specific disorder or challenge, because children and adults are individuals. And if you've met one, you've met one. Every single person comes into this world with their own experiences, their own upbringing. There is nature and nurture involved. And so it is important that the people you're working with have your child and their best interest at heart and not their bottom line. So I don't want you to discount any of those programs. And I'm not going to name programs because every city, every state has different ones. We have used independent resources before with great success. Like I said, I admire educational entrepreneurs who find ways to meet needs that aren't being met without going through a ton of red tape in a school system or a medical system. I think it's important. But I also think the beginning point of identification needs to start with doctors and professionals. So if you're thinking that there might be processing issues or a specific language disorder, I would start with a speech language pathologist. Ask your pediatrician for a recommendation and go see them, or start at your school. If your school offers assessments or your state requires, they offer assessments to homeschoolers. Look at your laws, find out what works for you, and find the least expensive and most globally appropriate way to get started. Talk to your pediatrician. If you're thinking about things, if you're thinking that you may be dealing with something like autism spectrum disorder or an anxiety disorder or some other kind of like neurological challenge, I would start with a child psychologist. I think a child psychologist has a better background to work with kids and teens than a therapist or a counselor at first to tease things out. I think therapists and counselors are amazing and wonderful, and I've seen both in my life. But I've seen them after I've ruled out other diagnoses, and we just need to talk cognitively and behaviorally about what I need to do going forward or my child needs to do going forward. So when you start with a psychologist, they have the PhD behind them, and they look at the cognition and the cognitive behaviors and things like that. And then they can also make a recommendation to you if you need to go further with like a neuropsychologist, neuropsychiatrist, or a psychiatrist themselves to see if there's a more physiological problem that's going on or challenge that's involved in whatever it is you're diagnosing. So I think it's important when you're dealing with anything like that, you start with a good child psychologist. And starting with a child psychologist, it's important to remember that they work for you. They work for you. And the best psychology relationships are that they are relationships. So if you don't feel comfortable or your child doesn't feel comfortable, you can shop around, and you should shop around. You should go with someone else and try someone else, do some consults. Your psychologist is a partner on your team, so they should be talking to you too. If they're not talking to you about what's going on in the room or letting you in the room for at least a portion of the time, then you can't follow through at home. and you can't make actual and effective changes in your child's life. So you need to make sure that you're working with someone who is on your team and treats it as such. So shop around. Remember, a friend of mine told me that her husband, who's a psychiatrist who works with very difficult situations, always says that psychology and psychiatry is like dating. You know when you know. It's all about that knowledge and that click and that connection, because if you don't have a strong relationship, you can't make cognitive change. You can't make improvements because the trust isn't there. If you're worried about sensory input, some challenges like that, if there are some gross or fine motor delays or things that just don't feel like they add up, I highly recommend a pediatric or an adolescent occupational therapist. I think occupational therapists are unsung heroes. They can make such a huge difference, and they know a lot about the way the body is put together and all of the senses and how they work together. They can find things you never even dreamed of. The occupational therapist was the single best therapist in all of our years of therapy that we ever worked with our daughter. So much improvement, so much confidence building. She worked on gross motor, fine motor, sensory input, sensory output. She ended up working in conjunction with the OT and a PT for some other kind of things that we were noticing with some physiological delays and challenges. And then they worked together in a team with a psychologist to talk about how anxiety feels in the body and how we can start to feel physiological triggers before the actual meltdown or panic attack came on. It was such a valuable experience that I highly, highly recommend it. So once you have an identification, if that's the route you go, then you can determine, do I continue seeing the occupational therapist or the physical therapist or the psychologist, or do I go over to a family therapist or a Christian counselor, or do I work with my doctor in a way, or a speech language pathologist, or do I take my dyslexia or dysgraphia or dyscalculia diagnosis and go to one of those freestanding buildings and try for some therapy in that way with some of my flex spending or other money? So then you have the options, and you know the diagnosis is sound because it's based off your child and not the services that are going to be sold to you. So you have a better and more objective view of what you're dealing with. Does that make sense? Okay. So in a nutshell, to test or not to test? Yes, no, maybe. It's a very personal decision based on what you want to get out of testing. So the next questions are, why do you want to test? If you want to test just for your own knowledge, but things are going pretty well in your homeschool, I would say save the money and invest that in things that build on your kids' strengths and passions, so they're more invested and more confident and more excited about their homeschool. If there's something that's affecting them globally and they're struggling academically, socially, emotionally, neurologically, psychologically, whatever, then you pursue testing. Once you decide to pursue testing, start with the medical profession. Start with objective parties that you feel like are on your team, have your child's best interest at heart, and give you a solid diagnosis. And then decide who you're going to go with for therapies and resources and support, whether that's a freestanding independent building, a program you read about online and you want to try, whether that is those professionals at the hospitals or the systems where they work. And then you go from there. All right. So if you have more questions, I would love to hear about them. You can go over to the show notes for this episode, raisinglifelonglearners.com/podcast. And there's a link to the contact form, which goes right to my support email address. And I will get back to you within a couple weeks. Sometimes it takes me via email. If you are a Learners Lab member, you can drop a DM if you're interested in becoming a Learners Lab member. It is a community for parents who are homeschooling neurodiverse and neurotypical kids, but we specialize in conversations and group coaching each month about neurodiversity. And there's places and activities for kids, for the whole family, and places that you can get your questions answered. It opens up about once a month or every other month. So if it's closed right now, you can get on the wait list and jump in on our next open. Or you can leave me a voicemail. I get back to those messages within a couple of weeks too. But if you know somebody that might benefit from the answers to these questions, I would encourage you to send and forward the podcast episode to them and encourage them to subscribe. And if you get a chance, I'd love it if you leave a rating or review, because it really helps get the word out about the podcast. If you have other questions that you'd like to have answered on the podcast, please leave them at the support email, support@raisinglifelonglearners.com, or over on the show notes page, that contact form. Okay, we will be back next week, same time, same place with another episode. I can't wait to talk to you then. Bye for now. Have a great week.